People are treating me and my novel Impact like shit. In a few months, I will be finished with a sequel, and it will be called Dance of Death. I like stealing titles of existing novels and just applying them to my own novel. Whether the title really fits or not doesn't matter. I don't know what it is about liberalism, but liberalism seems to put an almost transcendental level of insanity into people. Here is some perspective about age of consent. It used to be about the time when a person hits puberty. That's how it worked for millennia. And people were still able to build civilizations and invent technology, so it must not have been so horrible and dramatic. Then the feminist movement came along, and gradually they campaigned to raise the age of consent to 18. It took them quite a while, and it was incremental. It's not like it was accomplished overnight. Why is it at the beginning of the 20th century no one would have been mad at Austin Jones, but now, at the beginning of the 21st century, everyone is? Why is it that at the beginning of the 20th century it would have been easy to find a 14-year-old working as a prostitute at a brothel in some dusty frontier town, and no one would have been mad, but now at the beginning of the 21st century everyone would be mad? And why didn't society collapse because of that back then? Nature made it so humans hit puberty at around 13. No law can legislate that away. Some girls will be sluts because their brains are wired that way. It's just nature. There is nothing we can do. A 13-year-old will play at being a slut or a porn star the way some male children who want to be soldiers will play pretend of being a soldier, then enlist in the military. A 13-year-old girl interested in being a pilot will probably want to be around airplanes and maybe fly in one before she becomes a pilot. Well, some women are born in the same manner to be sluts, and they will seek the attention of rich, successful men. It is not the fault of any man, no matter how old he is, that a woman, no matter how old she is, if she seeks that man's attention, you have to blame nature on that. It's already evident the feminist movement is aligning itself with Sharia law. If you look at comments of the people who are angry at Austin Jones, the stuff they wish on him is the kind of stuff that ISIS would do to people. Now, if Austin Jones literally went and committed this kind of stuff to other totally innocent people, such as raping them, cutting their heads off, lighting them on fire, I can understand. But what he committed was a fantasy crime. A fantasy crime is when hysteria causes people to believe something is a crime when it isn't. I can't understand what it is about liberal ideas that makes people insane. Insane when it comes to defending those ideas. They want to put a gun to your head to make you embrace their form of altruism, and if you don't, they are going to pull the trigger. You might argue that James Grider is also putting guns to people's heads in my book. That's actually not true. He had the gun put to his head first. As it explains in the book, the government is passing laws that make it harder and harder for James to be himself. By passing those laws, the government is putting a gun to your head first. What is the altruism behind the laws that Austin Jones violated? The law is considered good because of a consensus that anyone under 18 is not ready for sex and cannot consent. Okay, but is that true for everyone? How do you measure that from person to person? Maybe some girl's brain wiring allows her to consent at 14. Why is it the fault of either the guy or the girl that they are attracted to each other? Isn't it the fault of nature? What happens when neither party satisfies the presumptions that the law takes upon them? What if the 14-year-old isn't a victim, but is simply doing what she wants? What if the guy isn't the villain, but is simply going along with what the 14-year-old is trying to do, and is simply exercising his freedom of speech and association, guaranteed in the First Amendment? Well, the law doesn't care about that. Not only is the law trampling the Constitution, the law is putting a gun to the guy's head, all for playing a role people want to believe he is playing, rather than the role he actually played. As you can see, the law is first and foremost about defending the narrative that underlies the law, not about defending reality. That's the thing with liberals. It's not about what's real, it's about what the feel-good narrative is. If the narrative is that he is the villain and she is the victim, the narrative must be enforced with utmost violence and savagery. If two people choose mutually not to live by that narrative, then one or both must be punished. There is a huge parallel between these anti-hebephilia sentiments and anti-racism sentiments, is that both are founded on denial, deceit, and delusion. Anti-racism agenda is also about defending a narrative and not looking at reality. And when someone is deemed racist, they receive similar scorn. You are vilified for pointing out statistics that black people commit the most crime, way more crime than any other race group. That would be an example of a narrative being more important than the reality. Then you are vilified for suggesting that black people might be by nature different from white people when it comes to IQ and intelligence. Again, reality and science don't matter. What matters is the narrative. And the narrative is that all races are exactly the same. It doesn't matter that races are not all the same when it comes to animals. No, somehow when it comes to humans, we are all the same. And any objection, any proof otherwise, is an evil thing. Well, here we have a parallel to that, where we have a certain narrative behind these anti-pedophilia laws. Reality is people become sexually active at puberty. But the narrative is that anyone over 18 fucking anyone under 18 is automatically a rapist. To challenge the narrative and to present facts disproving that narrative makes you evil. Do you see the parallels to how anything that's interpreted as racist is treated the same way here? This is what I'm writing about in my novel, Dance of Death. The book will prove that age of consent laws are not there for the victims. They are there to enforce the narrative. And it will show how a victim who refuses to acknowledge they are a victim in such a situation is dealt with just as harshly as the villain. Now, why does such a narrative exist in the first place? After all, it's a fairly recent narrative that has generated a tremendous hysteria when in the past people used to shrug it off. Well, there's two reasons. First, the narrative was pushed by feminists who resent men, and because they feel inferior to men, they dedicated their lives to punishing men. This age of consent thing was about punishing men. Now, I know that age of consent applies to both boys and girls, but that's only because the law has to apply equally to everyone. There were no men, no male activists demanding that they don't want a 20-year-old woman having sex with them when they were 15. No, it was the other way around. It was the women demanding this. Feminist women who wanted to punish men. Another reason for this narrative is white genocide encouraged by the Jews. Think about it. Single black mothers produce up to 10 children by their 30s, and welfare encourages them to do so. Meanwhile, many white men are scared of talking to girls. There are BuzzFeed videos where white men are admonished for being potential rapists, and how sexual encounters are all borderline rape. Well, if a single black mother can produce up to 10 children, and a white woman might barely produce 2 children, which race will become the minority pretty soon? Blacks don't care about age of consent. If they did, then how can there be a 37-year-old black woman who is already a grandmother? Muslims don't care about it either. The only people who care about this are idiot whites. There are BuzzFeed videos that are basically telling you subliminally, don't date, it's too much trouble, you might end up raping the woman. Who is going to buy into such a dire narrative? Only white people. Who is not going to care? Blacks and Muslims. In Dance of Death, James Grider utters several calls to action in the book. He tells teenagers to start looking for adults to have sex with. If you are all having sex, they can't throw you all in prison. What are they going to do? Put prison bars around the entire country? Well, I wouldn't put that past them. So he tells girls under 18 to find guys over 18 and have sex with them, and vice versa. He also tells teenagers to flood the internet with naked pictures of themselves. If you are embarrassed, that's too bad. It's for a good cause. This is why people should be buying my books, so they can be inspired. James Grider's there to cure your insanity, and to make you stop following false narratives that do more damage than any pedophile. James Grider believes that there ought not to be a law when it comes to so many things. The only exception is when the laws are made to curtail the power of authority. If you want laws that curtail something private citizens can do, then you have to reconsider your assumption that you are a good guy. James Grider in the book gives calls to action. Why can't a person like myself go into public and give that same call to action publicly from my own mouth as myself? Why is it illegal? Why is it that I have to write a fictional character, a fictional story where a fictional character in a fictional scenario does that? I just told you of the call to action James Grider makes in the book, and it's not an unfair call to action. It's a call to action against people who put the gun to your head first. People need to stop worshipping the police. The police have to do the bidding of those in charge, of whoever lays down the narrative, whatever that narrative may be. If you blindly support police, then you are a fool. Police are like an attack dog. You can love dogs, and you can go as far as rescue homeless dogs, but you wouldn't stick your hand out to your enemy's guard dog that's barking at you, would you? If you would, you are an idiot. Cops are there to serve you until they're not. Security cameras are there to protect you until they fuck up your life. Don't rely on either. If you are the next Austin Jones, who will stand up for you when the cops come to enforce the enemy's narrative against you? Do not allow the police to use digital data as evidence. If Austin Jones met those girls in real life, and they twerked for him with their pants off, he wouldn't be arrested because there is no proof. Well, to protect ourselves, we must make any digital communications be viewed as private communication that no one can ever revisit, and thus make it illegal for police to act upon them. That's what's frustrating about this. The violence these people wish on Austin Jones, they should be wishing on the police instead, on the government, on the people in charge who destroyed a freedom that had existed 100 years ago, at people who hunt around for your digital communications so they can arrest you based on a string of keystrokes you put into a communications app. Austin Jones is not a predator. Those who arrested him are the predators. People in these comments are the predators. People who created the narrative that mind-fucked everyone this way are the predators. Imagine somebody taking something nobody gave a crap about, and in a span of a generation, convincing people to become violent psychopaths over the so-called violation. You are always better off without some law than you are with some new law. Before age of consent laws, these girls might have done something they may or may not regret, but the harm it caused was negligible. If they thought they made a mistake, they learned from it and went on to do things differently. If they didn't want to communicate with Austin Jones, that was their freedom. But Austin Jones did not get punished. Suffering was minimal as a result. Many adult women will also pick the wrong man and whatnot, so it's not just a teenage girl problem. But when the law was created, what was also somehow created was turning the whole society into ISIS-like psychopaths when it comes to this matter. And now people are going to prisons for nothing. You're not only taking away Austin Jones's freedom, but you're taking away the freedom of these girls to seek some kind of benefit from a guy like that and engage in free exchange. It's like with criminalizing marijuana. If it's legal, some people will be high and maybe lazy. If it's illegal, people will be in prisons or killed. So how in such cases does the law add positivity or goodness to anything? You legalize prostitution, and the worst thing anyone suffers is a wife whose husband might pay to fuck another woman without her knowledge. You make prostitution illegal, and people end up in prisons. It would be so nice for me to have a daughter and tell her that if she sends a naked picture to some guy older than 18, that's on her. We are not sending anyone to prison for 30 years because of that. You know not to burn down the house with matches. So this is just another one of those things you simply have to know. Imagine saying that to your daughter. No, Austin Jones is not going to prison. You're just going to have to live with your vagina out there, exposed. Just like if you played with matches, became reckless, and burned the house down, you will just have to live with all your stuff turned to ashes. By the way, girls like these guys because of a sexual attraction. All of it is a sexuality that drives them to be his fans. It's not his singing. It's not whatever talent he supposedly has. It's sexuality. Parents in order to get an accurate picture of what's going on, have to imagine that their 13-year-old daughter's vagina is moist when she looks at this guy. Why is it so hard for them to imagine that? I don't know. But that's the truth. It's not a coincidence. Girls make up the majority of the fan base for these kind of guys. You see how by virtue of never changing himself, he went from an innocent to a criminal mastermind in the eyes of the police. At 14, he was attracted to other 14-year-olds. But then simply by changing nothing and psychologically remaining the same person for the next 9 years, he became a despised pedophile by the time he was 23. Apparently, we're told, something is supposed to shift in his brain, where at 15 you can find another 15-year-old hot. But a few years later, that's supposed to change. Why? Why is it supposed to change? Is there some kind of biological mechanism? That's some kind of switch that's supposed to flip? This isn't like some intellectual thing where playing with toys in a sandbox is not intellectually stimulating after a certain age, and that's why you quit that activity once you're past a certain age. But sexual attraction is sexual attraction. I mean, it remains what it is. Why would a body of a 15-year-old become less sexually stimulating to him 8 years down the road when he's 23? Another thing people are outraged by is that he got away with this for so long, for years. I think that's because it's just one of those things that nobody gives a shit about. Like, I wouldn't give a shit about. But it's just one of those things where, he stumbles across this one wrong person that is suddenly outraged by it, and that's why it gets exposed. This isn't some kind of a villain mastermind scheme. This is just people regularly interacting. In the Wild West, in frontier days, some 15-year-old girl out on a farm somewhere might have lifted her dress for him and showed her vagina to him 150 years ago. And nobody would have known. And if they knew, nobody would have done anything. They would just say, well, we have a daughter who is lascivious. And they might give her a scolding for it. Don't lift up your skirts for older guys or whatever. But that's as far as it would have gotten, Nobody would have been hung. Nobody would have been sent to prison. Nobody would have gone out and got the sheriff or something. The sheriff was out there, to catch bandits and thieves and murderers. It's not the sheriff's job, the police's job, to police, the behavior of some horny 15-year-old girl. That's why I think if the same thing occurs by way of modern technology, like a video being sent, we should pretend it's the same thing as if it happened in real life. And if we can't prove it in real life, we could only speculate, then we have to pretend we can't prove it when technology is involved.